to give a 2-line encapsulation of your story to the audience, as I understand it, you're very well educated. You went to Wharton, you worked at Bear Stearns, Bain Capital, then you went to the French Culinary Institute. You learned how to be a serious chef. You open up this banger of a restaurant with raw food, pure food and wine. Everyone in New York loved it. It was going really well. And then you met this man who came into your life who was somewhat sketchy, and notwithstanding your sophistication, bit by bit, he eroded your sense of self, your understanding of what was real. And before you knew it, you had lost everything. Is that a fair summation of how this thing went down?
Yeah, that was an incredible summation. That was, better than I can do it in a concise way. But yeah, that's what happened. And what I've learned is that my story was an extreme version of something that happens to people a lot more than people realize. And I know this now from all the messages I've gotten in my DMs since the show came out and since it became much more public, is that this type of manipulation can happen a lot more than people realize. And it also can happen to men and women alike. And so part of my telling of the story is to, is to really help educate people how it happened. And that was the most important part that the show on Netflix left out, and that the filmmakers left out, is any explanation of how this happens, which is what would allow people to help protect themselves.
And which is so unsatisfying, because what's most interesting about the story to many of us is how someone as sophisticated and well-educated and successful as you would fall for this guy's lies.
Yeah.
That's what we all want to know, right? Because in our heads, we want to say, oh, I would never. But I mean, I have covered enough of these stories to know, don't ever say that, because 9 times out of 10, the person being targeted has a bio not unlike yours. For some reason, these con men go for the sophisticated, smart types.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, similar with cults. They actually need somebody who's got a certain level of intelligence, because it's almost like you can't train you need somebody who's got a certain level of intelligence to be able to pull off this long, slow manipulation. And I mean, I've spoken to people who have PhDs in clinical psychology, attorneys even, who've had their world turned upside down in a way that they never expected. And so, again, that's what I write about in my book, is really taking the reader along with me through this sort of nightmarish journey about getting manipulated over time, and really trying to, as honestly as I could, even in places where I felt it didn't reflect well on me, to help people understand how this happens and also the psychology behind it. And that's really also what was left out of the show.
Have you ever heard the story of, I'm going to mess up her, is it Anderson? Bonita is her first name, NBC journalist who got lured in by this doctor who said he had figured out a way to do prosthetic, Bonita Alexander, to do prosthetic tracheas on people. And long story short, he was a big fraud. And he convinced her that they were going to go and be married in Rome by the Pope, even though she was divorced. And also, she's a newswoman. You can't find more cynical mofos than news producers. And she got lured in. And what she said at the end, Sarma, is something that of our interview, you might relate to, which was, because she's also very smart. He needed her to be smart because that's where the Jones came from. Like, it wasn't going to be fun for him if she were too easy a mark.
Yes. I mean, part of why this can happen is because certainly, whether it's my wiring or whatever it is, but I almost couldn't, it's like I couldn't fathom that somebody could be so diabolical. And also his motivation, it wasn't that clear, because it's not like in the end of this, he walked away with all of this money that he took from me. He just, spent it, gambled it away. That wasn't the point for him. The point for him was the thrill that he and people like this get from the takedown, because again, I'm not a psychologist, but when you're wired a certain way and you don't have empathy and you go around in this world, it's like life is a game, and to manipulate people is, I think, what gives people like this a rise. And so, again, the bigger the takedown, the bigger the high they get, I suppose. And that's really the point of it, is the destruction.
Well, and I want people to remember this. I want people to remember Bonita, again, a hard-nosed NBC journalist who was doing journalism at the toughest levels you can, who was convinced by this fraudster that the Pope was going to marry them in the Vatican, notwithstanding the fact that she was divorced, and that Bill Clinton was going to go and Barack Obama was going to go. And the only reason she found out it was all a lie is a friend at NBC was like, Bonita, we checked the president's schedule. He's not going to, even the Pope's not even going to be in Rome on the date of your wedding. Hello. And sort of the mask finally started coming off, and she started realizing she'd been totally manipulated. So the point is simply, while the lies may sound so obviously outrageous to those of us on the outside, these fraudsters build slowly to gain your trust and control over you before they really start with the huge whoppers to where, you're really believing what looks like to the outside world obvious nonsense. But when you're in it, you're so far removed from your original self, it can happen. So, okay, let's talk about how it happened to you. So you did the corporate stuff using your Wharton degree, and then like everybody, you decided you hated that. You go to culinary school, you open up this raw restaurant, and it's a hit. It's like doing really well in Manhattan. This is what, the early aughts?
Yeah, it opened in 2004, and it was a beautiful restaurant. What I was so proud of is that it wasn't a restaurant for, it was a raw vegan restaurant. It wasn't a restaurant for vegans. It was a restaurant for everybody. And, the food that we made, now I realize kind of how ahead of its time it was, because this was 15 years ago, and it really was about clean ingredients. So there were no fake meats. There was no processed food whatsoever. So, and there were no, 15 years ago, there were no seed oils. So it was really about showing people how incredibly good, really, truly clean, nutritionally dense food can be, not just in the restaurant, but through the brand One Lucky Duck, where we had products that were sold through Whole Foods, and kids loved them, which meant a lot to me. So, and this was my whole life's purpose. It wasn't like I just started a business and wanted to make money. This was my life's purpose, was hopefully being able to have a positive impact. And, it was a beloved restaurant because people came there, and there was, it was very important to me that there was zero judgment. We weren't dogmatic about anything. So half the staff or more probably weren't vegan. Most of our, half our customers, it wasn't like that. There was no, we weren't like annoyingly dogmatic about it. There was no judgment whatsoever. It was just sort of showing people how good this can be. And, we were doing great with it. And I had all these opportunities to expand and take it global and open in other locations. But I was running it on my own in a way, and very overwhelmed. And I now understand more about my psychological wiring too, that, I always needed a trusted partner to help me grow the business. And I didn't have that. And I was overwhelmed, and then also went through a painful breakup, and was at a particularly vulnerable moment when this man slid into my DMs, as
They can smell it. They can smell vulnerability.
They absolutely.
They know how to
It's like a
exploit
spidey sense.
women who are down. And it can go the other way too, but it's, in this case, it's a man taking advantage of a woman. All right. So, you're just out of a relationship that didn't work out. You're growing your business, but that's tough. It's challenging on any individual. And, but it's succeeding. And there's a little bit of this. I'm going to show some Netflix clips because it's just interesting how they documented some of we can see the B-roll of the restaurant and so on. Let's take a look at SOT 51, which is about the beginning of your career.
My undergrad major was economics, and I feel like I got there by process of elimination. So I went to UPenn, Wharton, and Philadelphia. I think what happened is when I was there, it was like, what is everybody else doing? Everybody's gunning to go work in investment banking. I got hired by Bear Stearns. Somebody that I'd worked with said to me, do you really like this work? I mean, is this what you really want to do? And my first thought was, do you like it? Do people like it? And he sort of confronted me on that. Nobody else had really done that. He said, you seem to be interested in food. People that I worked with had subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal, and I had a subscription to Gourmet magazine and Food and Wine. That might have been a clue. I wasn't going into the right field. I left after a year and a half. At that time, I wasn't under any pressure to get a job financially, so I went to culinary school. I finished at the French Culinary Institute in '99 and then focused on working in food.
Now, I understand you don't love this clip. What is it about this that's off?
Well, that clip I didn't have any issues with. It was the parts that I had issues with were mostly what they left out of the series, including any explanation of the psychology of it. And then they misused a call at the end, and they actually
we'll get to
moved
that.
my words
Okay.
around. So
Hold on, because the audience isn't ready for that yet,
Yeah.
but we will definitely get there. Okay, so there you are. You're making the restaurant. The documentary calls attention to the fact that Tom Brady, Giselle, Alec Baldwin came in and actually wound up hitting on you, but you weren't really in a place where you thought you could do that. This is before Ilaria, or
Yeah.
at least was like, there was some sort of a vibe going there. It was potentially an option, but didn't happen. I mean, he's got his own issues, but they're not quite as bad as the man you wound up with. So then enters the guy who is kind of the other star of the Netflix documentary, who was going by Shane Fox, but actually has a different name. Anthony, is it Brugalis?
no, his name was Anthony Stranges. He's since changed it to Anthony.
Sorry, Stranges.
Yeah, he's changed it to Anthony Knight, which I always point out just because if anybody out there comes across a very large dude named Anthony Knight, he legally changed his name, I think, to try to
Beware.
hide further. Yeah.
How did you meet him? What was his name when you met him?
Well, he said his name was Shane Fox, and I met him through Alec Baldwin through our Twitter conversations, which is part of why, I write about Alec in my book and our relationship, and then how, oddly enough, it was just through DMs and Twitter. Alec had just joined Twitter, and I think that this guy just got lucky enough that he got there early, and so Alec followed him back, which in a way gave him at least some kind of a credibility that made him a little bit more, I don't know, legit. So I wasn't quite as suspicious as I might have been otherwise. And that's something that people like this always look for, is any kind of sort of validation that they can get. And
How did he explain to you that his name wasn't Shane Fox?
well, that came out later, but he'd crafted this whole sort of persona that he worked in these clandestine operations, which of course is the perfect cover if somebody's a con artist, because, they have an immediate excuse to not explain anything. And so eventually I found out his real name, but when that happened, by the time that happened, I was already ensnared. And also by that time, it was as if, well, of course, that's not my real name. Of course, I have to have, different identities because of what I do or whatnot. I mean, a load of crap, but at the time, I allowed
Now,
it.
Sarma, did he love bomb you? Because usually that's what these guys do.
Yes. In my case, it wasn't so much love bombing as it was more like validation bombing, because what this man did, it wasn't that I was so in love with him or it was about some sort of romantic delusion. It was more that he knew he had clocked me as somebody where what meant the most to me in the world was this business and what I wanted it to do for the world. And then at the same time, he figured out what all of my weaknesses and vulnerabilities were. And so what people do like this, and I think cult leaders do this as well, is they present to you your goals and ideals and the best version of you and what you want to be ultimately, and then somehow attach themselves to it as if the only way to get there is through them. So I would say in my case, it was more of like, I don't know, it was like a validation bombing, like sort of overwhelming me with feeling like he recognized and understood what I wanted to do and understood all of my hopes and dreams and my frustrations, and that he would be able to remove all of those frustrations and enable me to grow my business into the business that I wanted it to be without, the influence of sort of unsavory investors, or because I was in a position where a lot of people wanted to come help me expand the business, but they were not the right people, or they were predatory in one way or another.
Well, the restaurant industry is notoriously sketchy, and you don't know who to trust.
Yes.
So I can see how it would be difficult to understand, like, is this somebody whose money I want? Is this somebody whose partnership I want?
Yeah.
Enters this guy who's charming. You didn't then know about his criminal history or what he'd done to another woman. So I get it. You're, kind of willfully blind to some of these things about him. Many women go through this when they're, first coupling with a man who may be the answer to their problems. Every once in a while, something comes along that reminds us of the power of storytelling. Something bold, meaningful, and grounded in faith. The Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, is a new 7-part series from the Daily Wire based on the novels by Stephen R. Lawhead. In the series, as pagan gods fall silent and empires collapse, one man's faith lights the spark of a civilization reborn. It's a story about courage, order, and moral clarity. It's the kind of story Hollywood does not make anymore. Through blood, faith, and sacrifice, Merlin becomes the bridge between myth and history and shapes the destiny of kings. The Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, premieres exclusively on Daily Wire Plus on January 22nd, 2026. Watch the new trailer now at pendragonseries.com. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.